do I have permission to undo your bra? Do I have permission to fondle your testicles? But you could say, like, do you like that?
Good morning and welcome to the Moments Beyond Swiping podcast. Today is a really special day as we have a really important featured guest with us, Dr. Jessica O'Reilly. She's a Toronto-based sexologist, she's an author, and TV personality. She's traveled to over 35 countries. She has a TED Talks in Vancouver with almost 2.8 million views. Like, wow. So thank you for coming.
I don't even know if I knew that.
We did our research.
Carmelia Ray, of course, our co-host, online dating expert, and celebrity matchmaker.
Thank you. So glad to be here again and really excited to get into this discussion because sex is literally a motivation.
Is that what we're talking? Are we talking about sex?
Yeah. Yes.
Do you want to leave?
Good, I'll stay.
No, we want him to stay. Yes, we're talking about sex and dating and mating and all of that in this very interesting podcast.
Yeah.
So Devin, why don't you lead?
There's a lot of questions that I've thought about for myself, and when I think of people who, whatever the case may be, maybe getting back into the dating game or are in the dating game and have these questions, I wanted to bring in the professionals and help us understand some of the questions that we may be totally way too awkward to ask or ever look into. Let's see what we can come up with.
Okay.
So, assuming I've been seeing my partner for some time now and I'm ready for the next step, how would I share my desires or needs without coming off weird?
I think the easiest way is to simply ask your partner what they want. Because if you're letting them be the one who's making the request or setting the boundaries or expressing their desires, then it's natural for them to ask you. Right? So you're going to ask them what they're into. Are you saying you want to have sex with them or you want to be specific about what you want to do?
Yeah,
sexually?
you know, if you're dating for a month or so,
Assuming you have not had sex in a month.
Exactly.
Because here
That's
you also
exactly the
said
point.
dating for some time, and for people out there who are dating, some time could be third date, and some time can be third month. I actually had a client that I worked with recently that did not have sex with her partner that she was exclusively dating until the third month. And frankly, in today's dating climate, that's a considerably long time. A considerably long time. Would you agree with that? 3 months of dating?
It depends on the age because we have more 26-year-old virgins than ever before.
Wow.
So than all the previous generations. So some people are choosing to hook up with different people, maybe every week, and other people are choosing to abstain altogether. So it really runs the gamut.
We can thank AI and video games for that.
Oh, goodness.
I actually think it's more a matter of choice. I think it's that if you want to go have sex on your first date, go do it. And if you want to wait till marriage, go do it. And there's less judgment on either side. It may be more rare, for example, to wait till marriage, but millions of people still do. Many, many millions of people. So what you'll see is just a huge range. So you've been dating a month, you think you're ready to have sex. I'm this like unromantic, practical approach, which is, are you into it, right? Do you want more? Actually communicate. I always say if you want to have the sex, you have to talk about the sex.
So Jess's approach is rather clinical, but direct.
I don't mean it clinically. I mean that people don't. If you can't talk about sex, I don't feel you're ready to be having sex. And we've created a culture in which having sex is somehow easier or more normal than talking about sex, right? People look at me like, well, you talk about sex for a living. I'm like, if you have sex, yes, I happen to monetize it and it's a part of the brand, but everybody should be talking about sex. You won't need my help if you start talking about sex with the person or people with whom you're having sex.
I think part of the context of the question is, how do you share those desires? What crosses the line between being creepy and overbearing versus having that discussion? Like, do you tiptoe around it? Like, what's a good way to present?
Or even maybe a better way to ask is, would there be signs typically that you're aware of that a female gives off, or the male gives off, that says, you know, I'm looking for it, and, you know, sometimes words don't even have to be spoken.
I don't think it has to do with gender, and I definitely don't think there are surefire signs, because that's like saying if I lean into you this way, I'm consenting to sex, and that's certainly not it. However, come on, you've probably already been kissing, you've been doing other things, and so you can feel someone's body language to know if they're moving into you and asking for more or pulling back. And having said that, you want to be 100% sure. You want your partner to be 100% enthusiastic about this experience, regardless of age.
Yes.
And so I think, you can look for signs that they're reaching a little farther, they're pressing a little harder, they seem to be excited by, they're excited in their body, absolutely. But in the end, you've got to say, does this feel good for you? And that's kind of a sexy thing to ask anyways. I'm not saying you have to say, do I have permission to undo your bra? Do I have permission to fondle your testicles? But you could say, like, do you like that? Right?
Sure.
And then so you're constantly checking in. So consent is not only mandatory, but it's sexy.
And I think also too, it's where you are having this PDA. Are you in a public place? Have you agreed to go back to his or her apartment, and now you've put yourself in a situation where clearly you're in the privacy, you're walking into the bedroom, you're laying on the bed, things might happen. So before you even get to that point, there definitely should be a discussion, because sometimes through that action, some people, again, they're not great at reading it. Oh great, she's in my bedroom, she's naked, she wants to do this. And then you're caught in a situation where, I may not be ready.
Right, and sex means different things to different people. Like some people might want to do stuff with their hands, or do stuff with their mouth, or have some sort of intercourse. So really, I'm really happy, because I think the tides are shifting, changing, such that people are actually talking about it. They're saying this feels good, that doesn't feel good. I'm really into this, I'm not into that. And I know that's not a comfortable conversation for everyone, but if it's an uncomfortable conversation, it's probably an important one.
And I love that you say that, because one of the biggest changes I made in our algorithm for Moments was that in our research, none of these platforms talk about sex, and why not? Because it should be spoken about. It is a major pillar in success of any intimate relationship.
And
so,
on that note, I think a good question to ask in a dating situation would be, what is intimacy like for you? When do you typically, when do you know or feel comfortable to take it to the next step? Like what is your expectation when you're dating somebody that you're ready to move forward sexually? And what does that look like for you? Because I don't know, I mean, I don't mind oral, but it really has to be with someone I'm very comfortable with, and for me that's going to take time, right? So I think those are conversations you can have even before you get hot and heavy and caught in the storm.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish people would be talking about that over drinks instead of drinking an extra drink to get loose. Have a conversation. No, because
or feeding him or her the extra one to,
absolutely.
That's a mistake, because then you're not really you're not thinking clearly, and that leads to more challenges, given that you're not you're not aware.
Right, and that's a common trope in rom-coms and in popular media, that they're one drink away from saying yes. I mean, that's a part of our rape culture. That's a part of trying to manipulate somebody.
Yeah, and I think it's
sex.
a terrible comment. I don't drink, nor does my fiance.
Oh.
So it's nor did we when we met.
Right.
So it's we didn't have that tool that a lot of people seem to rely on. So
right, and if you think about young people, we don't want young people getting drunk or getting high and having sex. Why do we hold ourselves to a lower standard than we hold teenagers?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you think about, we always talk about young people, don't drink too much, don't get high, be prepared. Well, adults, don't necessarily follow the advice that we dole out. So I'm not saying you can't loosen up and have a drink. I'm suggesting, however, that if you could talk about it instead of just kind of having an extra drink, fumbling around in the dark, and we have all this data suggesting that we are more likely to regret what we do if we overconsume. And I'm not
Exhibit A.
I'm a drinker.
I like to socially drink also, but I do know, yes, my inhibitions tend to open up, and I become far more flirtatious and far more confident, and also less aware of what I'm doing, or just throwing it out the window.
And boundaries. Aside from sex, I just start talking. And I'm like, oh dear, why did I say all that? Yeah, exactly.
So is there any stat that you do know on the average length couples wait before having sex?
So it definitely depends on age, and there's a huge variety. Some data from some of the dating sites will say that it's 4 dates. Other dating sites will say that it's 4 weeks. We don't.
So there's nothing really.
And well, it also depends generationally, because they say that millennials will use sex as to determine whether they want to start dating. So sex first, date later. Whereas mature singles, I would say 35, 40 plus, would definitely want to have the emotional, intellectual connection before entering into a sexual relationship.
Some of them.
Some.
Yes,
I
I just think there's a huge variety, and I think
Absolutely.
you have to figure out what your sexual values are, right? What does sex mean to you? Is there an emotional piece to it? For some people, there isn't, whether you're 50 or 17. So I think that you have to figure out what works for you, and if you haven't considered what are your sexual values, then I don't feel you're ready to be in a sexual relationship. Know what your own values are. Know what's important to you. They might change over time, absolutely, but if you haven't considered these things yet, slow the roll on the dating and work out your own stuff first.
Which is the perfect segue to the next question, which is, how important is sexual compatibility between my partner and I? Is it a deal breaker? Can it be resolved, or not likely?
And I love this question because it's super important.
Yeah, sexual compatibility is essential. You probably aren't going to have a monogamous relationship without sexual compatibility, but sexual compatibility is not something that you find in another person. It's something that you create together. So if I like one thing and my partner likes another, if we care about this relationship and we're committed to the sexual component of our relationship, and we know that great sex doesn't just happen in long-term relationships.
Sure.
You actually have to invest and work at it and learn and push your boundaries and find common ground. You can become compatible, not with anyone, but with almost anyone. There's not one person out there that you're supposed to be with. There's not one person who's going to be a sexually perfect match. You know, I have clients where one of them's into really kinky stuff, and you know they want to do the more hardcore kink, and then the other one's into really romantic sex, and of course they can have the hottest sex ever because they're learning from one another. But if you judge your partner, there's never going to be compatibility, and in fact I don't think you can really be compatible. Well, you can be compatible with someone else who's judgmental, I guess, but you're never really going to have a rich relationship if you're judging other people's sexual proclivities. You know, your kink's not my kink, but your kink's okay. In my community, we say we don't yuck someone else's yum, right? So
I love that. Don't yuck someone else's yum. Tweet that.
Right, so like whatever you're into, I'm not going to judge it. I may not be into it, but I can, you know, if I like you and I'm attracted to you and I love you and I want to have a great sex life with you, I'm going to be open to trying to understand, okay, why is it that this thing makes this person tick, you know?
Yeah, I think where I see in my world of matchmaking, we talk about sexual compatibility, it's not necessarily so much the preferences or style of sex. Often the big challenge comes in the frequency and in desire. So number one is, how often do you want to have sex? Because nobody wants to be with a partner where it feels like you have to crave and beg for intimacy. And sometimes it starts off really hot and heavy, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you're that couple that has sex once a month. And for some people, they have sex once a year. What is that? That, in my opinion, becomes like, I'm not sitting here judging, but I can tell you that becomes very psychologically damaging and stressful for the person who, you know, again, there's a big disparaging difference in frequency, libido.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that? Because there are things
one.
that will be deal breakers for some people.
Right, so I'd say that's the number one issue, and the real problem is that we think sexual desire should occur spontaneously, and sexual desire in long-term relationships does not just happen, right? If you go to work all day, maybe you put the kids to bed, maybe you help them with their homework, you clean up the dishes, you made dinner, you take a call from your mother-in-law, you don't just think, oh, well, now I want to have the sex. So you actually have to cultivate that desire. So if you wait until you're in the mood to have sex, you might never have sex. So you have to, I always tell people, make a fire and ice list. Fire being the things that facilitate the possibility of sex. It doesn't mean every time these things happen that I will have sex, but I need these things to get me in the mood. And what are the things that detract from sex? And how can you eliminate some of those things from either your evening routine? So for example, if you know that you're always stressed out when you get off the phone with a sibling or with something, don't take calls from them after 7 p.m.
Sure.
You have to change your lifestyle in order to facilitate, because we use the word libido, and libido, you know, has to do with, I think we associate it with a natural sexual desire, right? But your libido fluctuates with your diet, with your exercise, with your mood, with the people with whom you surround yourself, all of those things. So yeah, differentials in desire is the number one issue. You need to work it out. I tell people to actually take a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, write down how often you want to have sex. Draw a line. Write down below the line how often you believe your partner wants to have sex. Your partner does the same, you change papers, and you talk about it, because if you want sex more often than your partner, you tend to underestimate how often they want it because it feels like they're always saying no. If you want sex less often than your partner, you tend to overestimate how often they want it because it feels like they're always saying sex, 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 can we have sex now, right? And so you're probably closer than you think, and you have to have this actual discussion.
Sure.
And I think, early on when you're dating, you can ask, like, how important is sex to you? Because for some people, sex is not a very important thing.
Both of what you just spoke about are questions in
Of
my
course.
algorithm.
How important is sex to you? Certainly in the qualifying process, before you engage in this relationship, a lot of times people get together, there's high chemistry, they don't talk about that compatibility, then they're in that relationship, they're in love or lust or whatever have you, but they didn't have that important conversation because guess what? After they compared numbers, he's a 1, she's a 10, or she's a 10 and he's a 1, and now you're left with a serious decision to make. Are you going to accept the status quo, or is this going to be a constant conflict in your everyday life that actually rids you of your happiness, right? Because then it does seem like a demand because it's just not a fit. And that's the other thing, Jessica, is do you have a willing partner? Is it somebody that actually, when you say caring, the relationship is not about me, it's about the other person, it's about us, it's about wanting and knowing that that number is a 10, you're a 1, look, I'm gonna do my very best, I can make it to a 5.
Yeah.
The truth is, 5 times, the 5 number is what I can do, and that's it. Right. But if you're a 10 and I'm a 1, and I sit and say, and draw my line and say, well, I'm a 1, sweetheart, deal with it. Yeah. Now you have a real issue.
Right, and I want to just say that, for some people, once a month is really fulfilling. For some people, they don't want to have sex at all. They're asexual daters. Some people want it every single day. And it doesn't mean you have to meet your partner's needs. And I want to be really clear. Let's say I want it once a week and my partner wants it 7 times a week. It doesn't mean I need to work my way up to 7. It's just as much on them to go take care of themselves. And what I see from couples who have fulfilling sex lives, even when they have these differential and desire, is that they see sex outside the box. It's not just one specific act. They're doing other things that bring intimacy. They're physically affectionate. They're open to giving each other a hand sometimes, but not as a job, not as a favor, but because you both derive pleasure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And is the sex good for you? I gotta tell you, oftentimes when people don't want sex, it's because they're not getting the sex that works for them, because they're not speaking up, or they don't know what they want, and their partner isn't giving them what they want. So again, it all comes back to not just talking about your expectations around frequency, but what does good sex look like for you?
I've had a lot of women who've complained to me in the past conversations saying their partner gives horrible oral sex. So they actually rather not have oral than to tell the partner. They don't want to embarrass him. They don't want to say, oh, it's too rough or it's too hard. They'd rather just stay away from that instead of having the conversation of, I really love oral, but like, we need to talk again.
Yeah, or even saying, I really love the way it feels when we do this. Could you try this like that, right? It doesn't have to be a criticism. It doesn't have to be a critique.
Guide your partner in your hot spots.
Exactly, and if they've ever...
Some people don't know how to, they actually don't know how to do that, and they're so confronted by it that they just let it go.
But again, this has to do with avoiding uncomfortable conversations, and you'll achieve nothing in life, with family, with friends, with business. If you avoid uncomfortable conversations, you have to have the uncomfortable conversations.
So it seems like sexual compatibility can be created.
Yes.
It needs to be worked towards.
Totally.
And if you're not willing to do that together as a team, there could be some trouble in the room.
I think I have a podcast on sexual compatibility as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, we should put that in the link.
I have to look for it. So
100%. If somebody has it that sex is a very important partner criteria, and they communicate that, then that's what they're going to attract. A person who puts sex as a high priority would typically not attract somebody that says, well, I don't really want to have sex, because they would just keep going. Thank you, next.
But I think it's a good question, because I do think that if one of you has a high sex drive and one of you has, these are kind of arbitrary terms, but a lower sex drive, I do think you can make it work. And what's really important to know is that where you're at right now may not be where you're at in 5 years, because there are
People change, you have to
hormonal
grow
shifts,
together.
there are lifestyle shifts. So to think that you're compatible because you're similar in the beginning does not at all mean that you're going to be similar in 5 years, 10
Or
years,
it will,
50
or
years.
it will sustain, because there are so many partners that lose interest.
Of course.
You add children, you add a mortgage, you add a car, you add debt, you add all kinds of other things. You add temptation,
Right.
social media, all kinds
So in
of
other
things
words,
have an
add
impact.
real life to the scenario.
Yeah.
And
Let's
Yes,
talk
so-
about it in
that
5
works.
years.
So compatibility to me is a matter of both partners being willing to put in a similar amount of effort to make the relationship work. It's not about wanting it with the same quantity or wanting the same things. It really is about being willing to put in a similar amount of effort, because oftentimes when people come to you with incompatibility issues, they're like, my partner needs to change, my partner does this, okay, like, let's back it
Blame
up.
game.
What can you do differently? So if it's
Sure.
not both of you looking for common ground, and I see this again all the time, where the higher desire partner says something's wrong with them, they need to come up. I could say, what's the difference? Why isn't there something wrong with you? You need to come down. There's nothing wrong with either of you.
Sure.
You need to both be willing to put in the effort. So compatibility is about a similarity of effort, not a similarity in desire.
Interesting.
So good.
All right.
Next, age-old question.
What are your feelings about sex on a first date? And I've got a couple questions that are relevant to that question. Yep.
So we might differ on this. I think
Sure.
you should do whatever you want. I'll tell you, I had sex with my husband almost the first night I met him. This was 19 years ago in the back.
Well, I had sex with my first husband. We're not married now. That's not the reason, but yeah. I think it was the first night.
Yeah, and
I was in my early 20s.
yeah, I was 20 years old. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a
And
while ago.
I have no regrets, and even if we weren't together today, I don't think I'd have any regrets. So again, it's about you knowing your own sexual values. So if you think sex on the first date is either risky or wrong or doesn't align with your sexual ethics, then that's perfect. But if you, so you have to figure out what works for you. And I know people want. Oftentimes I hear people say, well, I want a number. I want to know that after 7.2 dates, I should have sex. And if I have sex at this time, we're more likely to last. Listen, we don't even know, because even the research will look 5 years into a relationship. 5 years is nothing, right? They don't follow people for 20 years into a relationship. And
Some
so-
studies do, but they also follow them through the end of that relationship as they get into new relationships. So the lifetime of a relationship is unpredictable.
Absolutely.
Totally
It's why we
unpredictable.
can't even predict the divorce rate, right?
Right.
You can't say 100 people got married, 50 people got divorced, and the divorce rate is 50%. We always hear the divorce rate is 50%. It's not 50%. The estimates, for example, like in Canada and maybe across North America, is around 41% right now, and it's declining for a couple of reasons, because people are opting out of marriage, because people are waiting longer to get married.
Sure.
There's less stigma around divorce, so I do think some people are choosing to get divorced without worrying about what people think. I think there's even pressure to get divorced in some cases when we come to cheating. If your partner cheats, now there is pressure that you should leave them. Well, I'm not saying it's okay to cheat, but people do make relationships work after infidelity.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't have any relationships.
Sure.
Over not any, but there would be very few relationships if people didn't sometimes cross boundaries. Again, I'm not saying go out and cheat. I think that you should, make a commitment to whatever your relationship agreement is. But I think there's pressure in every direction.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's not that I differ in your opinion about have sex when it feels comfortable. As a matchmaker whose primary role is facilitating long-term relationships, I've always subscribed to the idea of waiting until you feel that this person is someone that's going to lead into a long-term relationship. Reason being is most people that come to a matchmaker are at a point where they've already made the choices of having sex early on, choosing the wrong partners, and actually having the regret of, oh my God, I don't want to randomly sleep around with people. I've been there, done that. So in my situation, it's more about waiting to know that you're aligned on other levels. Sexual compatibility, yes, you can probably tell right away that there is a physical attraction, and you might really want to have sex with that person. But what you don't know, the unknown, is what is that person's view of having sex with you on a first date? If you have that conversation and say, listen, I really want to have sex with you. However, I don't want you to take it the wrong way, that that having sex with you means you're not going to call me, or whatever the situation is. Be transparent about it, and you can still choose to, at that point, say, all right, let's do this.
Yeah.
Or I just to let you know, I really want to do this, but I'm going to wait. And then you have respect, not that you don't have respect for yourself for sleeping, but you've had that conversation. And now you're not left in the dark. So that's my opinion on waiting to have sex, because I think if you see this person as someone you're going to be with the rest of your life, what's 30 days?
Well, I do
What's
think
a couple
that
of
I
weeks?
think that's a good point, that there isn't a rush.
No, there's no
necessarily.
rush. You can do other things.
I think it
Lots of
comes
other
down
things.
to one thing. The time is irrelevant almost. I think it comes down to the T word. Does the man and the woman have that trust there to, trust their partner's not going to make fun of a mark they have or a deficiency, and the other way around, and they trust that this is going to work out, and they trust that their partner's being honest with them, and that it will work.
Well, people have different sexual confidence levels. Like someone could get naked, feel totally okay with their
Absolutely.
body, and other people need a lot of warming up. Like, oh my God, I have stretch marks and I've had babies, or or they have
This stuff
like
can bother
penis
a lot of
issues, or
people,
whatever
right?
the case is. So,
I think,
if two people, as you said, feel totally hot and heavy and ready to go at it on date one, like we're not judging. But we don't know the outcome.
I also worry that there's this idea that there's this double standard, and it's quite gendered if we're talking in a heterosexual context, that if you have sex on the first date as a woman, you're not going to receive the same respect from the guy. And I'm thinking I wouldn't want to date that guy, because anyone who's going to judge me based on my decision, that was the same as your decision, by the way, because you also had the sex with me. So I always worry about. I think that those gender double standards are beginning to be chipped away at, to the point that hopefully they'll be eradicated.
Always
over
a
time.
two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could agree with you more.
I'm more on the side of taking the safe bet and waiting, just because if you're from a matchmaking perspective, most people that want to have that long-term relationship are willing to do a little bit more screening before they jump in the sack.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, these hookup apps seem abundant, and I've heard lots of people do sleep together on first nights. There's hookups. So there's a difference between trying to find a relationship or believing that this is relationship compatible and you sleep together on the first night. But what do you think about the millennials and these hookup apps where they are just out looking for a hookup? Do you think that's actually what they want, or do you think they're afraid of commitment, or do you think they're afraid of their own abilities, so a hookup is the easier way?
No, I think if you look at the raw data, yes, they're using these apps, and it turned into something else. If you look at the data among millennials, they're not having more sex. They don't have more sexual partners than when you compare
So
them
they
to,
have
for
less
example,
earlier.
At some
Less,
points.
right?
Well, it depends, right? Like, you have people who are having sex at a younger age, and you have people who are opting out and waiting until they're older. So I don't, first of all, the myth of hookup culture has been documented with the data. People are not going out and having more sexual partners. This is what the data says thus far, on average, in comparison to previous generations. But there is this idea that everybody's doing it, and so you can feel the pressure that you're supposed to do it too. But I do think there are more conversations among young people about the types of sex they're having, the types of relationships they're getting into. And I'm very optimistic about the future of relationships. I know people are worried about digital media and the hookup apps, but I think what we've done is broaden our options. I think we've helped even the playing field. I love the idea of apps, because I think if you're shy to walk up to someone in a bar, I'm glad that you're able to take a few minutes to craft a message. I think that's really helps people to develop different types of skills. And I guess I come from a teaching background, so I always think about different types of learners and different types of communicators. So I'm happy that they exist, and I don't think it's as wild as we want it to be. If you ask millennials what they're doing, most of them are having sex with a regular partner. They may use different language, but I think over time humans have always behaved in similar manners. Technology changes it a little, but the way we describe it changes, right? Like, for a while back we used to talk about hanging out or chilling. Now, hooking up. And there'll be new language that evolves, but it doesn't mean that human behavior is that different over time.
Perfect. Any final questions?
Yeah, I do. I think this is, how important do you think in a city like Toronto and other cities is the evolution of online dating? Because the city life is becoming chaotic. We're distracted by everything. Social media, our phones. There's just statistics that say by 2022, 95% of intimate relationships will meet on online dating platforms or relationship platforms. I believe that to be true, because it's just that place where you can if there's a proper algorithm in a platform that you're using and you kind of break that barrier, of course you can never really get a true compatibility until you meet someone in person to get that energy. How important of a role do you think online dating plays in creating relationships moving forward?
I'll let you answer that.
Well, I think it's an exciting time. I think that it plays
So
a
do
very
I.
significant role. I think even in relationships, and we were talking that we've never met in person before, but because of our digital interactions on Instagram and via my podcast.
She showed up on the sidewalk and I was like, hey Jess! Like, I knew it was her.
As if,
it was
as
like I knew
if,
her.
yeah.
So
Exactly.
if we're doing that in business, why not be doing it in other realms of our life? I made friends. I think we probably met online at one point through somebody else.
Years ago.
Yeah, so we weren't
And
on
then-
a date.
Then I follow her, she follows me, we interact.
And we're able to support
Yeah,
one another
absolutely.
through that digital relationship. This is a new relationship that also started online. And
Yes.
so it applies across the board. You bank online, you get a mortgage online, you do all these things online.
You shop online.
Yeah, and I think
You find a girlfriend
What's
and
so
boyfriend
cool
online.
about dating online is that not everyone has to be a connection, but you might end up doing business with someone.
Sure.
You might end up being friends with someone. You might, end up meeting someone you met online. It might be their cousin's butcher's friend, son, who you
Yes.
end up really connecting with. So
Right.
I think it's an exciting time. I think the digital age is an exciting time, and I think that humans certainly can abuse the use of technology, but overall, I think technology has a positive impact on relationships.
I like that.
And on that
And I
note,
believe that.
Jessica, how do people out there in the world digitally connect with you to form this connection and learn more about you?
It's like I'm just recruiting friends.
Yes! How do they get to know you? And what's the most exciting thing you're up to? What do you want to share with everyone?
So I'm at Sex with Dr. Jess on all social media. I have a series of online courses if you want to learn different sexual skills, relationship skills, communication skills online at happiercouples.com. And I have a podcast, Sex with Dr. Jess, on all your podcast platforms.
Amazing.
Fantastic. That is
And
awesome.
we will be back for another episode on Moments Beyond Swiping.
See you soon.